So today we will be talking about context in React. So context provides a way to pass through the component tree without having to pass props down manually at every level. In a typical React application, data is passed top down, that is parent to child via props. But such usage can be cumbersome for certain types of props. And for example, local preference, UI theme that are required by many components within an application. So, context provides a way to share values like these between components without having to explicitly pass a prop through every level of the tree. So, in this video, we will be talking about context and all of its concepts, like when to use context, before we use context, what should we know, how are we going to use it, some examples, and rest of it. So, let us first start with when to use context. So, when to use context. So, context is designed to share data that can be considered global for a tree of React components, such as the current authenticated user, theme, or preferred language. For example, we will see a piece of code snippet where the manually we thread through a theme prop in order to style the button component. So let us add that component. So we'll go to our any of the component. Let's go to hello.js and we'll just modify this. So RCE, this is a class component. Inside the return, I will add, we will just return a toolbar. So return toolbar, and the theme is dark. Now we are going to write the function toolbar. So function toolbar, it takes props as an argument, and here the toolbar component must take an extra theme prop and pass it to the themed button. So this can become a little painful if a single button in the app needs to know the theme, because it will have to be passed to all the components. So here we will have a return. Inside the return we will have a div, and inside this div we will have the theme button. Where the theme is assigned to props dot theme. Next we will have also a class component. So along with this we will also have another class component that will extend React. So class themed button extends a React.component. And there also we will have a render method. and inside return we will have a button. This button will have a theme of this dot props dot theme. So this is how we do it typically, but we will not do it like this. We will try to find an easier way inside this. So here we are passing the theme to all of our components manually. That is, first here the theme is set to dark, then we are passing it through props.theme, and here also through props.theme. So using context we can avoid the passing props through intermediate elements. Context lets us pass a value deep into the component tree without explicitly threading it through every component. So we will create a context for the current theme with light as the default. So here we are going to create const theme context, and we will assign it to react dot create context, and it will be light in default. So now inside our hello main component we are going to remove this return statement, and we will use a provider to pass the current theme to the tree below. Any component can read it, and no matter how deep it is. So in this example we are passing dark as the current value. So instead of toolbar we will add theme context dot provider, and this value is set to dark. And now we will add the toolbar. So similarly here what we are going to do is a component in the middle doesn't have to pass the theme down explicitly anymore. So we do not need this theme dot props. So this is all about the function toolbar. Lastly, about the themed button, we are going to directly refer to this dot context. And before the render method we are going to add static context type. This is assigned to the theme color, theme context. This is how we will be using context here. So now if I hit Ctrl S, so you can see that we are getting a small button. We haven't styled it because there is no toolbar or themed button like that. But this is how we are going to pass if we want to set it to a specific theme. We will see an example later on in detail. So now the current question is, before we use context. Context is primarily used when some data needs to be accessible by many components at different nesting levels. So apply it sparingly because it makes component reuse more difficult. So the main concept of using React is that we make reusable components. So this is going to make it a little difficult. So you need to be careful while using context. If you only want to avoid passing some props through many levels, then component composition is a simpler solution than context. But we'll see that in next video or in some other video. So that is a simpler approach than context. So there are some method in which the inversion of control can make the code of our application cleaner in many cases by reducing the amount of props we need to pass through our application and giving more control to the root components. So such inversion, however, isn't the right choice in every case. So moving more complexity higher in the tree makes those higher level components more complicated and forces the lower level components to be more flexible than we may want them to be. So we are not limited to a single child for a component. We may pass multiple children or even have multiple separate slots for children. So there will be many cases when we need to decouple a child from its immediate parent. So we can take it even further with the render props if the child needs to communicate with the parent before rendering. However, sometimes the same data needs to be accessible by many components in the tree and at different nesting levels. So, context lets us broadcast such data and changes it to all components below. So, common examples where using context might be simpler than the alternatives include managing the current locale theme or a data cache. Now we'll be talking about the API. So React dot create context. You might have seen this line, that is const, and we've given it a name theme context, and we have assigned it to React dot create context and whatever is the default value. So let me just write the syntax for you. So the the syntax is const my context, and we will assign it to React dot create context, and we will give the default value here. What it does is it creates a context object. When React renders a component that subscribes to this context object, it will read the current context value from the closest matching provider above it in the tree. The default value argument is only used when a component does not have a matching provider above it in the tree. This default value can be helpful for testing components in isolation without wrapping them. Note that passing undefined as a provider value does not cause consuming components to use default value. The next thing which we are going to discuss is the context provider. So for the context provider, the syntax is my context provider context dot provider. So the name of my const is my context, so I will be using that here. So don't get confused, this will be according to whatever you name it. Dot provider, and then it will have its own value. So we will assign it the value which will be some value. So we do not know what value, it will be some value that we assign it. So this is the syntax for the provider, and I'll give the heading. So this is context provider. Every context object comes with a provider React component that allows consuming components to subscribe to context changes. The provider component accepts a value prop to be passed to consuming component that are descendants to this provider. One provider can be connected to many consumers. Providers can be nested to override values deeper within the tree. All consumers that are descendants of a provider will re-render whenever the provider's value prop changes. The propagation from provider to its descendant consumers, including .context type and use context, is not subject to the should component update method. So, the consumer is updated even when an ancestor component skips an update. Changes are determined by comparing the new and old values using the same algorithm as object.is. I would also like to bring your attention to the point that the way changes are determined can cause some issues when passing objects as value. So you have to keep that in mind. Next, we are going to discuss class dot context type. So let me just write a bit of code so that we can at least connect to that and then try to understand what I'm trying to say. So inside my class component, we will just have 2-3 more things. So let me just add that. I will add the component didMount, and inside that I will give a value. So let value is assigned to this dot context. What this is going to do is it perform a side effect at mount using the value of my context. Let us change this also to my context so that we do not face any confusion. This also to my context. Okay, now after component didMount, we are going to add component didUpdate. Component didUpdate. Here also let value is assigned to this dot context. And again we will just copy paste this and we will just change this component didMount to, so now it will be component will unmount. And then inside the render also, if we write the same statement, let value is this dot context, so it renders something based on the value of my context. If I copy this and just paste it inside my render method, so it is going to give me here the, now what we are going to do is we will add my context to context.type. So here we will assign the name of our class is hello dot context type, and we will assign it to my context. So the context type property on a class can be assigned a context object using react.createContext. So we have created a my context using react.createContext. Using this property lets us assume the nearest current value of that context type using this dot context. We can reference this in any of the lifecycle methods, including the render function. We can only subscribe to a single context using this API. So if we need more than one C consuming multiple contexts. So if we are using the experimental public class field syntax, we can use a static class field to initialize our context type. So instead of context type, this we will write static context type, and then we will assign it to my context. This will be inside the class component. So here it is outside, that is why we are receiving that red line and it is giving me the error. So we will not do that. Now we are going to talk about another important part of context, that is context.consumer. So for that we will add a component like my context dot consumer, and there will be some value which will be rendered inside this. So some value or something, some value which will be rendered, that is rendered. And then we will close this tag of my context value. My context dot consumer. A React component that subscribes to context changes. Using this component lets us subscribe to a context within a function component. So make sure that this is for function component. It requires a function as a child. The function receives a current context value and returns a React node. The value argument passed to the function will be equal to the value props of the closest provider for this context above in the tree. If there is no provider for this context above, the value argument will be equal to the default value that was passed in the create context, that is this part. Okay, after this, next topic is context.displayName. Context object accept a display name string property. React dev tools using this string to determine what is display for the context. So the syntax for this will be my context dot display name, and then we will assign it to some string, just say my name. Then we will wrap it around my context provider and we will see it in DevTools. Now let us see a more dynamic example. So currently we just have a button which has nothing to display because we haven't given any name. So we are going to see a little more dynamic example for this. So inside my components I'm going to create a file. This file is named theme context.js. So theme context.js and this. So this is context, and now first we are going to export const themes. This is assigned to light. Light has a foreground. Foreground of this color, and we will add it inside an inverted comma. You can add colors according to yourself, and the background is assigned to, say, this. You can add as many properties as you like according to your wish. This is for light, next is for dark. So again in the dark also we will add foreground and background. Let me just copy this, and then we will just change the color. So here I want it to be and this will be, yeah. After this we will export const and we will create our theme context. Theme context, and using ReactJS.createContext we will give it the default value, which is themes.dark. Now we will add a themed button. So inside my components I am going to add themed button.js. So here first I am going to import theme context from theme context. From here we are going to export it, and then we will create a class component. So class themed button extends react.component. Inside the render we will have let props assigned to this dot props, and let theme is this dot context. Now we will add the return statement. So inside the return we will add a button. This button is going to have props. The style has a so it will have a background color, which is assigned to background theme.background. We have added that property inside the two things that we have added, so it is about that. So this is the button, and lastly we will add themed button dot context type, which is assigned to theme context, and we will export default themed button. Now let us go to our hello.js and we will just edit it a little bit. First of all, we will import our two components. Import theme context, and we will also import themes from theme context.js, and we will import themed button. Okay, so themed button from themed button. So the function toolbar has props and it is going to return themed button. We'll add an on change here. So not on change, on click. This is assigned to props dot change theme, and here we will write change theme, and we will close this. Now our main component, that is hello, we will edit that. So we do not need all of this, and we also don't need this part of the themed button because we've already created that component. So now inside the hello component I am going to use rconst to create the constructor, and this dot state has theme. This theme is set to themes dot light. Now after this we are going to add this dot toggle theme, and this toggle theme is assigned to this dot set state. Here state is assigned to theme, where the theme is state dot theme, and it will check that if the theme is equal to themes dot dark, because that is the default value, and if it is, then it will change it to themes.light, or else it is going to change it to themes.dark. Now inside the render, the theme button inside the theme provider uses the theme from state, while the one outside uses the default dark theme. So inside the return we will add a little bit of, we will change this. So, and we also do not need this let value. So inside return we will add page, and inside the page we will add theme context dot provider. This value is set to this dot state dot theme. And here theme, the toolbar is present, so toolbar, and then change theme. This is assigned to this dot toggle theme. So that is going to check. Now after the themes provider, we will add a section, and inside that section we will add themed button. So this is done, and after this we will just add this component inside app.js. So I've just made some changes so that we do not get an error. So I've just changed that page to div, and the section, I have changed that section to a small s. So that was causing some error, and now if we save all our files, and you can see I'm getting a change theme button, and also I'm already getting a button that is of the theme dark. So according to this statement, it had to change when it was, if it was dark then it is already going to be dark, and if it was not dark then it will be the opposite. So the theme is already dark, the background is of black, and the foreground is of gray, so it is not going to change. So this was an example. Now we will be talking about updating context from a nested component. So it is often necessary to update the context from a component that is nested somewhere deeply in the component tree. In this case, we can pass the function down through the context to allow consumers to update the context. So what we are going to do next is, inside our theme context.js, we will add, inside this React context, create context, we are going to add this, we will assign to themes. So the theme is assigned to themes.dark, and toggle theme is assigned to an arrow function. So in this way we are going to add changes, and then we will add a theme toggle button also. This will be similar to what we did in the last example. We can also consume multiple contexts. To keep context re-rendering fast, React needs to make each context consumer a separate node in the tree. If two or more context values are often used together, we might want to consider creating our own render prop component that provides both. Now, because context uses reference identity to determine when to re-render, there are some gotchas that could trigger unintentional renders in consumers when a provider's parent re-renders. So that was it about context in React, and I try to keep it beginner friendly. So if you have any doubts, then you can write your doubts inside the comment section. Do like our video and also do subscribe to our channel. We bring to you videos on React.js for beginners on a daily basis. So that's it for today, and I will see you in the next video.